You're listening to The Intellectual Investor, episode number 63, InvestED Interview, Part 2, written by Vitaly Katsenelson and read by Elliot. To listen to more episodes, visit investor.fm. To learn more about Vitaly's investing firm, IMA, go to imausa.com. InvestED Interview, Part 2. This is part 2 from last week's interview with Danielle Town from InvestED.
Hey everybody, and welcome to InvestED. I'm Danielle Town. So this week we have the second half of my interview with investor Vitaly Katsenelson, who lives in Denver, Colorado, and was kind enough to share with us his amazing life story. And just now in this second half, and if you didn't hear the first half, go back and listen to it because it's really an incredible story of how he immigrated to the US. And this episode, he's going to get more into that story, how he became an investor, how he got into long-term investing, and how that helps him with his happiness and most of all his creativity, which I think is such a beautiful way to think and talk about investing. So without further ado, here's Vitaly. Okay, now I'm going to get back to investing and how you got there.
Okay.
Because you said you were 20-something and teaching investing already at the University of Colorado in Denver. How did you get to from moving to the U.S. at age 18 or 19?
18.
At 18 to learning English in high school for 1 year to then going to college and then how did you get into investing?
Okay. So when I moved to Denver, I kind of discovered that I am fairly good with computers. This is like the only skill I had other than bussing tables. That was a kind of, that's the only other skill I had. And so I would basically apply for jobs that required any kind of computer skills. And I got a job working for an investment firm in Golden, Colorado, which is not far from where you grew up. Spent a lot of time at. But they basically hired me because my computer skills. After a while, they had a Bloomberg terminal, and
by the way, total chance. It could have been any kind of company, and you just took a job to do computer stuff for them.
Yes, in fact, just that's how random the life is. I think when I set up my first interviews with a company, I think I misunderstood the time or date to come to the interview, so I missed that interview. And they were kind enough to allow me to come back.
Aww.
Just think about how my life would have been different.
Yeah.
If somebody on another line said, we don't want people who miss their interviews. Just think about that for a second. I just can't even imagine that. So I get a job with this firm, and I get to learn about the wonderful world of investing. And just let me give you some, so when I was growing up in Russia, if you told me what investing is, I would have the image of like New York Stock Exchange where people are yelling and like literally the exchange, right? Where people are yelling so that was investing for me.
The guys in the scrum wearing those like vest things, all screaming at each other and holding pieces of paper.
Yeah, or like in the movie Trading Places, people selling orange features or pork bellies. That was investing for me.
That's how I imagined it too.
And that was my understanding of investing then. And I think I was second or third year in college, or maybe going on the third year. And at that time I was going through majors, like I was going through gloves. And I was struggling to figure out what I want to do. And then I have this aha moment because I realized I kind of like finance. Kind of finance investing. I like the whole concept of discounted cash flows. It just clicked with me. It just was something that was innate, sitting inside of me, kind of waiting to get out. And so at that point, I had this clarity because I was 20-something years old. I don't know, like 23 years old, maybe at the time. I don't know. And I said, well, this is it. I'm going to change my major to finance for the last time. And I got my undergraduate and graduate degree in finance.
Wow, as simple as that.
That was it. And then while I was getting my graduate degree in finance, I also did my CFA. And so I had an advantage.
Which is a very hard test to do.
It's a 3-year program, which is not easy to do. But the interesting part was that I was able to do master's and so basically had a full-time job, which is working for this firm, IMA, getting my graduate degree and getting my CFA. But I had an advantage because at the time I still lived with my parents. And I had a neglected girlfriend, so I didn't have a much social pressure to do stuff, So I was able, and there was overlap between master's degree and CFA, so I could study, let's say, I take an options class or futures class, and then study same material for CFA. So actually,
I mean, you're downplaying it, but this is very hard to do. What you're describing: full-time graduate work, CFA studying, which is an incredibly hard test that most people don't pass. And working, and I'm amazed you had any girlfriend, much less a neglected one. That's quite impressive.
Well, you're too kind. But so when I was done with college, so I was going to school at this point maybe for 7 years probably, because it probably took me longer to finish school because I also had a part-time.
You're learning English, by the way.
No, but I also had to work, right? So because I couldn't just go to college. So when most kids go to colleges today, they go to college and they barely work. I had to I probably worked 25, 30 hours a week. So, so took me longer to finish college, and most kids probably took me a year or two longer just because of that. So imagine this. So I had a job and going to college for a long, long time. I had all this energy in me. And then I'm done with school. Suddenly I have a lot of spare time.
Oh,
and I'm like, oh. And then a professor from the University of Denver, Colorado, Denver, reached out to me and said, you know what, we are looking for, you were a good student. We're looking for somebody to teach finance. So
you were working full time at this point, right?
But you
felt like you had a ton of free time because you were so used to juggling basically 3 different jobs.
Yeah, more or less, yes. Now I can psychoanalyze myself. My father always thought that kind of this investing thing is kind of, he always thought investing is kind of like gambling. He could never really see the difference between them. And I felt like this is a way for me to impress my father because, he's a teacher of 30 years. I'll be a teacher as well. So this is how I started teaching at university class.
That makes a lot of sense.
I tell you all this, the Freud is so right about all this, kind of son-father or son-mother issues, etc. So that was a kind of me trying to work out my father issue. And so I wanted to make my father proud. That's why I started teaching. And I really enjoyed it, by the way. So it was not a sacrifice in any way. The problem I found with teaching over time is that I got bored maybe on year 3 or 4 of teaching. I think I taught maybe for 7 years. But 3 or 4 or 5 years into it, I got bored because you kind of teach the same child subject all over again.
Mm-hmm.
That's number one. Number two, I hated grading. I hated give out grades because I kind of don't like. I like to be liked. Let me put it this way. So I didn't. So I really hated.
You couldn't be the hard ass who was giving people the bad grades they deserved.
I felt more about those bad grades than the kids who received them.
Aww.
So I, that was it. That was not necessarily my. So that's part of the reason why I stopped teaching. But what also happened as the challenge of teaching declined, like maybe on 2nd or 3rd year of teaching, I got a basically part-time gig writing for TheStreet.com. And because I was looking, I guess this is the mind that always looks for challenge, right? And so the challenge, so the teaching started being a challenge. So I started writing for TheStreet.com, and that was a huge challenge for me. And they were paying me nothing, and they were still overpaying me. And all you have to do is just go to TheStreet.com or read some of my early articles, and you'll see why. But I really enjoy. This is kind of became one of my loves, just writing, because I realized I think I'm so much better thinker through writing, because I have a very restless brain. And the only way I can really sit down and concentrate for long enough is to stare at my computer and listen to music and write. So that's kind of how I think now.
So is that a method that you use now in your investing practice, in your process with studying and learning about companies and making decisions?
Yeah. The only reason I have anything to say, period, and this is not a over exaggeration because I wrote about it. Because if you ask me about subject that I have never wrote about, most likely there's 50-50 chance that you get an answer that is incomprehensible because I just never thought of, my brain is, that's how, it doesn't function this way.
I'm exactly the same. Sometimes I'll come out with something useful, but 5 times out of 10, it will be completely ridiculous.
I almost feel like I'm I'm an outsider looking in at my writing. In other words, after I wrote something, I'm like, oh, this is a good idea. I wish I thought of that. I feel like I'm an imposter of my own body to some degree when I write because, and this is, I think, part of there are many reasons why I love writing, but one of the reasons is when I finish writing, I look at this, I'm like, wow, this is so interesting. And there's also this curiosity when I sit down to write. There is always anxiety. Like when I sit down to write this, I always have the anxiety because I'm like, what if I won't be able to write it? Like I've been writing for 14 or 15 years. And that feeling of anxiety maybe declined a little bit just because, overcame every single time. But my God, it's still there every single time. I just finished a 37-page article on Tesla. And you were actually, it's kind of funny when you came to my office in Denver, I feel like kind of sorry for you now because you had to listen to this article still being developed in my head at the time.
Are you kidding? It was so much fun to talk. So I got to see you in Denver in the summer when I was there, and we sat and chatted about Tesla for like 2 hours, which was so fun because it was on my brain and it was clearly on your brain too.
And so when I sat down to write it, I was still so curious. Well, in all fairness, when I sat down to write, I already had some ideas, but I still knew that I had to learn a lot. So I spent a good amount of time just researching it and learning and etc. Yeah. So
I also think the great thing about writing is it shows me where my holes are. Like when you talk, you can kind of skip over stuff and people will kind of nod along. But if you have it written down, it's so obvious when you're skipping something because it just doesn't flow. And clearly the logic isn't there. And so you have to fill it in. It forces me to think logically.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. Yeah.
So that's what you did with this Tesla article. It sounds
yes. I learned so much. So here's the thing. When I write, it's a very selfish process because I'm really, like a lot of times, I'm writing for the audience of one, which is me. Mm-hmm. It's me trying to learn through writing. When I taught, I basically was stuck to teaching the same subject over and over again. With writing, I can always pick new subjects to write about. And if you look at the progression of my writing, when I started writing, the only topic I wrote about was finance. Over the last 7 years, as I especially became a parent, like as a parent, and I started to write about other topics too, not just investing in stocks or stock market, but also about being a parent, about my trips with kids, I even wrote an article about personal finance, which is, trust me, is not something I ever thought I would write about because this is so outside of my usual thinking.
But it's something you're grappling with, and so
that's right. And I just yesterday finished writing an article about sleeping. About how important sleep is for our health, which is not something I realized until. So this is a new material right here. So I finished writing my 37-page article, and then after that I had to write a client letter, which I write every 4 months. And so I've been writing like kind of high intensity writing for almost 2 months, a little bit less than 2 months. When I was working on Tesla article, I would go to sleep late, and I would get up basically about maybe a little bit early, almost about the same time, like maybe at 4:30 or 4 instead of 5. But I would go to sleep late. I would go to sleep not at 8 or 9, but at 11 o'clock. So for almost 2 months, I did not realize, but I did not get enough sleep. And last week, I come to my stepmom's, my parents' house, and my stepmom looks at me and she says, "You look horrible." Like, you have baggy eyes, your skin has no color. Are you okay? And I realized I am not okay because I felt horrible. I had zero energy. And what I basically did, I sleep deprived myself for almost 2 months.
Yeah.
And and so I started looking into the subject, and I realized that when we look at our health, the first things that come to mind is the diet and exercise. What we don't realize that sleeping actually is as important. I would argue is actually more important than either one of those. But think about it this way: our brain basically, when we sleep, our brain gets repaired for the time we spent being awake. So it's kind of the nature. If you don't get enough sleep, our brain does not get repaired enough. And if you don't get if you don't get enough sleep, or you don't have enough good quality of sleep, it doesn't get repaired enough. So I'm not going to go deep into the subject, but I really recommend the book by Matthew Walker, Why We Sleep, which I think is actually incredibly well written book, very accessible, and he did spent 20 years of research on the subject. So it's a really, really good book.
Ooh, I gotta read it. I'm fascinated by info about sleep because I think it's something we all constantly struggle with.
Your listeners can read my article on the subject. I wrote about my experience and what I learned, etc.
When you start to think about how you're structuring your days and your weeks and your health, so you've got the trainer, you're focusing on working out, you're focused on eating well. Now you're focused on your sleep and making sure you're getting enough of it. When you make those choices, are you doing that for yourself personally, or are you doing it as an investor to make better investing decisions, or are the two so intertwined that there's no difference?
I'm basically trying to maximize my happiness. Okay. And I'm happy when I feel good. I'm happy when I'm at the most creative kind of, like, the reason I love investing because I'm allowed to be creative. Like, I think I look at investing as a very creative process. And
I love that description because not a lot of people would say that, but I completely agree.
And so when you get older, so when you're younger, you take health for granted because you've always been healthy. When you get older, you kind of start being a bit more mindful about this, and you realize this is not something, like, health is not something you do when you get old. That's something you should be doing throughout your life. And also your metabolism slows down, so you have to watch what you eat and how much you eat. And and you start going to the doctor and they tell you your cholesterol is high, so you start now thinking about the quality of food you eat. I'll give an example. So my cholesterol was high, and I really did not want to take medicine. There was no other reason other than just I thought it was a lazy way of just, I blame it on my Russian brain, I guess, but I thought it was a lazy way. It was a lazy way out. So I changed my diet where I basically, I'm on a version 3 of my diet now, but now I basically eat fish. I don't eat any processed processed flour. I don't eat sugar. So
that's quite strict.
Well, it's actually
hard to do.
Well, it's actually ended up being, so this is, believe it or not, I'm still happy. In other words, doing this does not make me unhappy. I actually did one compromise. I geo-fenced my diet. And what I mean by this is that this diet only applies when I am in Denver. If I fly out anywhere else, then I can do anything I want.
Oh, no. But do you see immediate bad results from that?
Not really, because I still, if you think about it, I still probably, out of 360 days a year, probably still spend 340, maybe, I don't know. Still spend 90% of my time in Denver. Okay. So if my diet, and the reason I did this because when I saw you in Zurich, when I was trying, in January, traveling to Europe is very difficult and not to eat bread. I found it to be just, not that because like for breakfast, if you want to eat eggs and you don't eat bread, it just becomes very difficult. So I realized part of the traveling experience is kind of food is kind of part of the enjoyment.
Yeah, and you want to enjoy things that you don't normally get at home.
Exactly. So that's why I kind of modified it. And I tested it because on the second half of my trip to Europe this year, I basically said, I'm going to eat anything I want. And I was afraid when I come back to Denver, I won't be able to go back to my normal diet. It was not an issue for me. So I'm like, okay, so I can do this. And so sleep is basically, I realized if I have no energy, if I don't get enough sleep, first of all, no energy is just not fun. It just, you walk like a zombie, just not a good state to be in. Also, if you don't get enough sleep, it's very the sleep impacts your creativity.
Yeah.
So I found actually, in fact, one of the consequences of me being sleep deprived for almost 2 months is that I suddenly discovered my memory really got bad. I couldn't, you and I would be talking about a movie, and I would not be able to remember the name of the actor.
Mm-hmm.
And so after that, I said to myself, okay, this is too important. And after you read the book, by the way, after you read the Why We Sleep, you realize that lack of sleep causes heart disease, Alzheimer's. More people are killed in car accidents because of lack of sleep than from drunk driving, or so it's really big. It's a really big deal. And the interesting part is this: you don't really have to do that much. Just like when we talked about budgeting, you just have to be mindful about this and kind of make a conscious decisions. Or create a set of rules, basically, right? This is what I value. So the same thing with your sleep, right? So if you, I'll give you a few hints. So if you if you limit your intake of caffeine to 10 hours before you go to sleep, 10, 12 hours before you go to sleep, it's going to be easier for you to fall asleep, because caffeine has a half-life of 7 hours. So in other words, after you drink caffeine, 7 hours later, half of that caffeine is still in the system. So, and caffeine basically reduces the quality of your sleep.
It makes me smile because you're just like such a investor type who knows exactly what the half-life of caffeine is, whereas most people would just say, oh, it affects sleep. But I love that you know the exact number of hours that you can go.
Well,
it's the best.
Well, I'm somewhat analytical, and in all fairness, I just read that book, so it's let's talk in 6 months, and I won't remember that. But
my rule is just no caffeine after noon. That's it.
Okay, no, that's right. And so what I do now is switch to decaf, after 9:00 in the morning. So if I still want to drink coffee, but then also, and this is something that's going to be a project for me to do over the next couple of weeks. If you dim lights, so basically there is this hormone in your body called melatonin that basically it triggers. It's like it starts. It's if sleep was a 8-mile race, that's a start pistol sound of start pistol saying it's time to go to sleep. It has nothing to do about the quality of your sleep, but it's going to help you to fall asleep, because that's what basically triggers of you getting sleepy. So the problem is our body has been designed for the time when we didn't have lights, right? So our body was basically, if you look at the sunlight and you still don't need to go to sleep. When the sun starts going down, the Mother Nature programmed you to think that this is the time to go. This time to go to sleep.
So your body was programmed to be asleep all the time.
Well, you probably, when I grew up in Murmansk, you're probably right. But thank God we had electricity. Yes, But so now when a few hours before we go to sleep, I'm dimming lights at home. Mm-hmm. Literally, mm-hmm. If I read something on iPad, I actually wear glasses that remove the blue light.
Oh, I gotta get those. I really want some.
It's $20 on Amazon. And I have
noticed the difference on my iPhone. If I have it on the low power, which takes off the blue light, versus the regular power, I actually start to think now, why am I not sleepy? And I realize it's because I've had it on the regular power in regular light setting. I can actually notice the difference in my body.
Exactly. And doesn't do it. Like, how much energy does it take from you? Very little, right? It's just, but then suddenly you have better sleep. Nothing you got to do is like, have a lower, you sleep better in the lower temperature. So if, it's normal room temperature in the United States, 72 degrees, you want it to be lower than that. So 65 degrees seems to be the optimal temperature. So these little adjustments, and suddenly and then here's the key. You need to get at least 8 hours of sleep. So, and obviously you don't fall asleep right away. So for me, it takes me about 20, 30 minutes. So it means if I want to get up at 5, if I want to get up at 4, I need to go to sleep at 8, which is very difficult to do considering I have, still have a 5, a 12-year-old at home, 13-year-old at home.
Why do you like to wake up early?
I find that I enjoy my writing in the morning the most. Like when everybody's still asleep, and I just put my headphones on. I have my laptop. I have this comfortable chair in my bedroom, and I put music on. And this is like my meditation. This is kind of this. I look forward to this an hour or two of writing. I just really enjoy this. So that's for the most part, that's when I write. So the only reason I can have run an investment firm and spend as much time on research as I do and write at the same time, because I write 1 or 2 hours a day on a consistent basis. Just that's why I can write. Like if you look at the collection of the articles I write, and throughout the year, it's probably like a book or 2 a year, like in itself. So
what do you do with all that writing? Do you put it out?
Almost all my articles show up on a contrarianedge.com, which is basically kind of repository of my articles. So if you want to read every article I wrote since the beginning of my writing career, in quotes, you can find it there.
Contrarianedge.com.
Yes. But also, and I think this is actually better value. And I don't know how you define value, because you pay zero for either website or this, what I'm about to tell you. But I think the even better value is get my articles by email, because when you get it by email, you get, in addition to my investment article, you get classical music. I love classical music. And every article includes a short note or long note about classical music, and usually it's linked to some classical pieces to listen to. Also, it includes my father's art and my brother's art. So that you can only get that in my email. And again, it's completely free, and you can go to Contrarian Edge and subscribe to my emails. And I
will personally highly recommend Vitali's email list. He sends out really interesting articles. As he just said, there's beautiful art attached to them. And whether you read it every time or every now and then, I always take something away that's extremely useful for my investing practice.
Especially when you don't read it. But yeah. No. And also, but that's only part of it. So, and then I'm working on the book.
Can you talk about it?
Sure. So
what kind of book?
So it's going to be called the Intellectual Investor.
I like it.
And which is a play, obviously, on the intelligent investor. But I would argue it's kind of the next more creative evolution of the intelligent investor. So it's completely built on the intelligent investor, which is kind of the Bible. Actually, I'm going to make a horrible joke, but if the intelligent investor is the Old Testament, that would be like the New Testament. Considered I'm Jewish, that's not necessarily good.
Also, you just set yourself a ridiculously high bar, but I like it.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. But anyway, I'm really, to be honest, this book only has a judge of one, which is me. It's really like where the first book I wrote was a really like active value investing, has 270 pages and 75 charts and tables. This one has, my second book, The Little Book of Sideways Markets, was really kind of the first book simplified for your neighborhood dentist. It's only 1/3 the size and much simpler. This book I'm really writing for me. And this is my kind of education, my journey of trying to become a better investor. So So I can call it whatever I want because, it may take me 5 years to write it or 10 years to write it. I don't have a deadline. It's really just there to educate me.
What makes you a better investor?
Well, I think it comes down to, I think the X factor is creativity. If you could, it's becoming more creative. And this is still, I'm trying to explore that. What can you do to become more creative? Well, I'll tell you this, I answered part of the question, sleep more, so just how about, start doing that. But also, what's kind of interesting, and coming back to sleep for a second, in our society, we have this attitude, we'll sleep more when we're dead, right? Because this is kind of our attitude. We admire people who are kind of what we call high functioning people who work, 15-hour days. That's not necessarily good. That's a kind of a Henry Ford assembly line mentality where your output is not very creative, but more very very standardized and very mechanical output.
That's exactly right. It's input equals output mentality.
Exactly.
Versus in a creative field, it's input equals who knows what.
Exactly. And
the amount of input doesn't necessarily have much to do with the quality of the output, which is what you asked.
It's a nonlinear relationship, right? It's basically a nonlinear relationship. Basically, for me to be a better investor, I need to become more creative. And this book is basically me trying to learn how can I become more creative. And so that's really. So there's a cute story in the beginning of the book, and I'll tell you about this because it's like one of my favorite stories of all time. This is kind of explains what the book is about. This woman comes to Dalai Lama and brings her son with her and says, "Can you please talk to my son because he eats too much sugar? Can you please talk to him and tell him not to eat sugar?" He says, "No problem, but can you come back in a month?" Like, okay. So the woman comes back in a month, again brings her son. The Dalai Lama looks at her son and says, "Stop eating sugar." The woman is bewildered. She's like, "Well, I was here a month ago. Like, you could have said the same thing." He said, "Yes, but first I had to quit eating sugar myself." And so this book is about me, stopping eating sugar. Basically, it's really about me trying to become a better investor. Before I can tell you how you should be a better investor, I should probably make myself a better investor. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what that book is about. So this is why there is no published. Like, I don't care. Like, honest to God, after you publish the books, you've gone through that. And put it this way, I checked off that item from my bucket list now. So writing the book. So this book is really for me because I really want to learn. And this is why there's no deadline.
And so it sounds like the answer to my question from a bit ago is that these changes that you've been focusing on, the sleep and the eating and the exercising, and probably others that you're trying out now, you're writing about for the new book, are for personal happiness and investor happiness. And it doesn't sound to me like there's really a difference between those things for you.
Yeah, so no, you're absolutely right, because I don't know where Vitaly, I start speaking in the third person about myself, where if I look at my individuality, right, where my personal life begins and where it flows into my investing life. Because even look at my friends, like I look at a lot of my friends. And I really, like, a lot of my investment friends are my very dear friends that I can talk to about so many other subjects other than stocks. I can talk about kids, whatever. And I think that's really the key, is that I can't really separate my personal life and investing life. So for me, being happy as an investor is for me being happy as an individual now. And that also means if I'm happy as a parent, as I'm happy as a husband, that also makes me happy as well.
Yeah. Which means that it's not just a job. It's something you would do regardless.
Oh, so if I won a lottery tomorrow, it would make, my life would not change a bit.
That's a good feeling.
I'm the happiest when I'm the most creative. if you look for happiness in material things, you're never going to find it because you can always have more material things. I look for happiness in the process of doing things, in the process of creating, and creating, by the way, not just articles, but actually, again, looking at investment as a creative process. So that's what makes me happy, I guess. That's going through the journey of creating.
That's beautiful. I can't add anything to that.